So finally, I am done with Histories by Herodotus. It was an interesting book. I enjoyed reading it. I learned a lot about history, culture, and many other things from the past 2,500 years ago. I'm going to give you my five takeaways. But first, I have to say that Histories is a book that you should read, especially if history is something that interests you. It's a book that is can add to the foundation that you need to understand the things that have happened over the years in various parts of the world, and in particular uh, Europe, more specifically Greece, Asia Minor, what we know today as Turkey, um, maybe uh, Italy and Levant, this Syria, the region we know today as Syria, Lebanon, that region, and in fact, then much of the Middle East, including Iran. Of course, Iran is like the main character in the book. It wasn't called Iran then, it was called Persia. Of course, uh, the Iranians of today are not exactly the Persians of then. Of course, it's the same thing for different places in the world. The Egyptians of today are not really the Egyptians of then, and the Turks, are they called the Turkish? The people who live in Turkey today are not really the people who lived there when it was the Lydia Empire and Hittites and all those people who lived there before. The populations have moved, of course. 2,500 years is a very long time. Nevertheless, histories gives you a perspective to how the world has evolved in the last 2,000, or not really in the last 2,500 years, because it doesn't cover that. It just gives you a picture of that, what the world was around 2,500 years ago. And from that, of course, then it gives you a good backdrop. You can then from there get to know or get to understand better the things that happened after now. Um, here are my five or six takeaways from reading the histories by Herodotus. The first thing is that the Greco-Persian War was more complex than I thought. I have always heard about the Greco-Persian War. It comes it's often mentioned in books or documentaries and, of course, movies. And the way I understood it before I read this book is that it was just a clear war between the Greeks and the Persians. It's Greco-Persian War. But then reading histories, I come to realize it wasn't that clear cut. It wasn't just Greeks fighting Persians or Persians fighting Greeks. There were Greeks, in fact, who were allies of the Persians and fighting other other Greeks. The Persians did not go to fight the Greeks by themselves. They went with a huge army that comprised people from different nationalities, Egyptians, Ethiopians, Indians, Arabs, other European tribes, people, Mongols, it had all these people from different parts of the world. So it wasn't just simply the Persians going to fight the Greeks. It was more complex than that. So that's my first takeaway. My second takeaway is that the ancient world was more organized than I thought. The society was very organized. It was very complex. It wasn't simple societies. These were very huge societies. And I was trying to imagine when I was thinking about Herodotus was describing the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire was huge. It stretched from Europe all the way to India. That's huge. And I was trying to think of the logistics of managing that kind of empire. And it must have been very complex. So the ancient world was very organized. And that also comes out when Herodotus explains to us how the Egyptian society was. Then you realize maybe it's me, maybe different people have had different or have understood it the way it should be. But me personally, when ancient Egypt was mentioned, to me it was an ancient society, like ancient in terms of inferior than what we have today. I'm thinking like maybe we are now more organized than them. But reading histories, then I realized, no, this society was very much organized, very developed, grandiose buildings and roads and waterways, whatever, mega projects. And I'm like, that is not very far from us in terms of like that, mega projects and things like that. Maybe we are better off than them on very few things, maybe the phone or the internet or things like that. But in other things, maybe they were even better than us in some other areas. So that's my second takeaway. My third takeaway is the ancient world was more interconnected than I thought. For some weird, I don't know where this came from. I've always thought that progressively the world has become more interconnected. And I mean interconnected in that different societies intermingle. That's what I mean. And I've thought that that has happened for more and more progressively with time. But reading histories, I realized no. The ancient world was so much intermingled. And that comes out in terms of religion, religious practices, military alliances. I've mentioned a few times that I found out that there were religious practices that were so common around, even major religions, because I thought maybe before Islam and Christianity and to some extent Judaism and Buddhism, that the world did not share, different societies did not share much in terms of beliefs. But turns out, no. Even before the religions that we know today came along, there were religions that were spread all over the globe. Goddess Minerva was worshipped in Africa, in the Sahel, and also in Greece, in Europe, and in Asia. So that was so interesting to learn that there were these gods. God Triton was worshipped in Africa, in the Sahel region, very middle of Africa, and in Greece, and in Asia, in Europe. So religion was these societies shared religion as we do today, with Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism, and all these other religions that we have today that have spread all over the world. There are religions that are no longer in existence today that seem to have been spread all over the globe, and maybe excluding the New World, or maybe not, who knows. My fourth takeaway is about race. Race is a sensitive topic today. It's become something that is so emotive. Reading histories, it occurred to me, and this is not only from histories, but it just occurred to me maybe by picking things from various sources. It occurred to me that what I thought about race relationships might have been wrong, because like I mentioned about these being more organized, whatever, that is something that has happened progressively. I've also thought that race relationships have become better with time, that they as the far back you go, the worse they become. But reading history, that's not what I see. In fact, I realized that in that time, 2,500 years, then skin color was not something that was important. And that comes across the way Herodotus himself describes society and people from different races, even when he describes dark-skinned or woolly hair. It comes across that in that society, these were not very important things that people focused on. People focused on more on your tribe than how you looked. That's how it seems, going by how Herodotus describes things, and also how the people he describes to us engage. So even when you talk about, because it's like race relationship has been contaminated by the phase of slavery that was more focused on how you looked, and that happened like maybe the last 400-500 years, where your skin color determined whether you become a slave or not. But that's not how it was. When Herodotus tells us about slaves in the past, these were slaves from all over the place. They were white, they were black, they were brown. The skin color didn't determine whether you were going to be a slave or not. And I think this age where that happened, maybe like 500, has contaminated our understanding of the past. Some of us, me in particular, it kind of contaminated that, because now that became like how I saw the past. Like that's how the past was. Yeah, the past had horrible things happening. Slavery was something that was accepted everywhere. But again, this slavery was not maybe what I thought it was. It was horrible, yes, but it wasn't like how I came to understand it, that it had something to do with your race or see. And this another thing, still on race. I remember watching movie 300. It's been like 10 years, or it's been a while. And I saw this, the movie producers decided to, maybe they did not decide, but they had to have these black characters in the movie. I think there was one, I'm forgetting his name, at least one. And at some point I thought, maybe they were just trying to do that because it was what is politically correct now, or is what is accepted now, like you should represent people of all races in whatever you do, in terms, especially in terms of movie production and things like that. So it wasn't something that was important to me, but I was like, maybe in that ancient time in Greece and Persia, I don't see how black people will appear there. But reading Herodotus histories, I realized, no, there were a lot of black people involved in that conflict. And this is not something they just created. This was a reality then. There were Egyptians, Ethiopians. In fact, Herodotus says there were Ethiopians from the east and west, and all of them were part, and in fact, they were fighting on the side of the Persians. So that was interesting to learn. Another takeaway, my fifth, is on how technical war strategy was then. Again, like most of these other things I've mentioned, and maybe it's just me, maybe I'm assuming that there are many people, maybe that's how I grew up to see history. And I thought that war strategy has become better with time. Maybe it has, but maybe not as to the extent that I thought that the ancients were more ignorant, more simple in their war strategy. It's now my understanding, especially from reading this book, that no. These people were very strategic. These people are very knowledgeable. These people are very skilled when it came to war. Maybe they had inferior weapons to what we have today, but they were as good as we are probably when it came to organizing for war. And I remember one particular case is where Darius goes to fight the tribe of the Scythians in Europe, and they play what you can call today a psychological war. And in fact, Darius has to run before he fights any battle in that region, and he escapes to Asia. And it was so well organized, the way these Scythians organized themselves and how they planned all this to happen. They needed to scare him. They knew he was stronger than them, but somehow they managed to scare him. And also there was the propaganda that was carried out by the other Greeks on the Ionians and the Persians. The Ionians were the allies of the Persians. And the Greeks, the other Greeks, especially the Athenians and the Spartans, decided to spread this propaganda by, maybe the channels are different. I think this propaganda happens today, but maybe the channels are different. Now we have social media. That can be a way to do some propaganda. We have radio, TV, the internet, and all that. They didn't have those, but the message is the same though, or is the same kind, where they write messages on rocks along the coast that tells the Ionians that, oh, you should defect to our side. But if you can't defect, when you go to battle to fight us with the Persians, sabotage the Persians. Now, even though the Ionians might have decided that we are not going to do that, the fact that the Persians read those messages, they made them suspicious of the Ionians, and that, of course, sabotaged their effort to fight the other Greeks, or to fight the Greeks. now, my last takeaway, I don't want to say it's the last one, but there are so many things I learned from the book, but these are the ones that I decided I'm going to share with you. Is that society doesn't change. Society is formed and run more or less the same way through generations. We tend to think that we can change society. Of course, some people manage to do that, and they manage to move society to a particular direction. But by and large, looking at that picture that Herodotus gives us from that era, 2,500 years ago, and looking at what we have today, and maybe looking back a few decades or centuries, if you have that understanding of the history that has happened around the world, then you realize society doesn't change. It remains the same. The more things seem to change, the more they remain the same. So that's a takeaway I get from you. Okay, now, this is a book I would recommend, or I encourage you to read, especially if you are someone who finds history interesting. If you don't find history interesting, then of course, I've had friends who've told me, oh, I'm not watching your videos because history is not something that interests me, and that's okay. We don't find the same things interesting. But if you find history interesting, then history should be a book you need to read. And in fact, Herodotus is called the father of history because many consider this work as the real serious attempt by someone to write histories. Now, I'm done with the book. We're moving on to the next book. Thank you.